Okay, while I was on a recent business trip, I decided to grab a book from our work library. So I got 6 Arguments for a Greener Diet. Ironically, this pretty much gives you a pretty decent background on what goes into most of the large-scale meat manufacturing facilities. Now, when it comes to the slaughterhouse side, there's a little bit on that, but its primarily has to do with different things like the amount of food that goes into it, your transportation look, how that affects everything else. So it's the whole continuum of everything that it takes to create a fairly Western in style diet, which is primarily fairly heavily meat-based. And most of this is about how you can have a more plant-based diet. It's better for your health and for the environment. So I'll read through the 6 scenarios that the guy actually goes through. So number 1 is less chronic disease and better overall health. That's based upon lots of the fairly well-trodden theories of eating high amounts of red meat not good for you, high amounts of dairy, high amounts of full animal fats, and those sorts of things. Less foodborne illness, which actually would kind of go back to better overall health. And then you have better soil, more and cleaner water, cleaner air, and less animal suffering. So you pretty much have the first 2 deal directly with humans, the next 3 deal with environment, which also directly deals with humans, and the last one is less animal suffering. Now, of course, this is also written somewhat with the Center for Science and Public Interest, which if you've ever read a lot of their work, I'd probably say it's like 75% actual fact and then 25% fairly well inflated based upon that initial 75%. So a lot of what they do is actually very good work, but they also seem to really over-sensationalize a lot of it. And that's what actually kind of really hurts this book. It makes some really good, interesting points. You know, they go through how much water it takes to create a quarter pound of beef. You know, how much manure, how much methane, how much of every single thing that comes out when it comes to animal flatulence, what happens with the massive amounts of manure, what happens when you put manure to help grow other things, soil erosion because of the monoculture of crop growing. So lots of really interesting and unique things that are actually fairly true in this book. And then they also kind of jump every now and then. There's a spot where they have these little green boxes. It would really kind of hurt yourself when you're doing these sorts of fairly well in-depth studies, is when you also mention these things are, that every now and then some of the things they talk about, they go, these are approximations. And that's what really, really hurts you, is when you do, oh, you know, there's X number of, let's see if I can find, there was one specific section that I remember reading that had this huge, here's when people actually get sick, here's when people actually get injured, and then a large portion of it was unknown. So if you have a large portion of what you're talking about, you know, here's some of the facts behind it, oh, by the way, a lot of what happens through this is actually an unknown variable. Okay, well, I'm trying to find that. I'll go through another section that I found. They talk about a 2-year-old who died from eating a hamburger. And when they discuss it, they actually mention that he may have died if he ate contaminated beef. And you can't have a section that says death by hamburger talking about a 2-year-old dying. Here we go. Major causes and cost of foodborne illnesses. And essentially you have a total of, yeah, this was based off of an estimate, and the amount of illnesses was 76 million. 62 million was unknown. And then they talk about the amount of overall deaths. Out of those 76 million, it was 5,200. When it comes to unknown, you have 62 million and 3,200. And I was like, you really can't do this huge sort of thing, and then like, oh, and there's this huge portion of unknown that doesn't actually fall under any of those. Oh, and at the same time, it's probably underreported. Okay, yeah, here we go. So they talk about this child who died, and when they say he skipped a live dialysis machine, of course it's horrifying to hear about a 2-year-old that dies. And they talk about how they had this deadly strain, and of course almost certainly came from a contaminated hamburger. Almost certainly. You can't preface something with the phrase death by hamburger and then end it with almost certainly from a contaminated hamburger. So the child actually did, of course, die from this horrible strain of E. coli, and then they make the idea of, oh, this most definitely potentially came from contaminated hamburger. Those are the things that actually kind of hurt the arguments. You know, overall, being somebody who used to be a lacto-ovo vegan, that's someone who still eats milk and eggs. You know, and they do mention that's a much healthier lifestyle, which it actually is, because you do eat a lot more fresh fruits and vegetables. And if you try to actually also try to do it gluten-free, which I've been trying to do now with my wife, it is a much more difficult thing, because also you can't eat that much in the way of grains. So they do make lots of very good and interesting points in here, but they also sensationalize them every now and then, which in actuality kind of hurts the overall argument. It doesn't make sense that if you were to decrease the amount of meat that you were to consume, if you were to eat more fruits and more vegetables and more whole grains and less refined sugars, you know, those things actually would make you a healthier person. You know, there's a lot of studies that actually do back that sort of lifestyle. You know, eating more wild-caught fish, eating more local, eating more fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, eating a lot more plant-based things. It would actually give to a healthier lifestyle. However, depending on where you live, that is entirely not possible. Part of the reasons why we have food the way we currently do have food, especially here in the United States, is that people want food to be fairly cheap. And in order to be fairly cheap, you actually have to do these essentially larger, I guess, factory-style farms. Would it be great if we could all go to a local farmer's market and get fantastic food and eat food that's local and seasonal at the same time? Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Is it going to happen? Absolutely not. Depending on where you live, you might even have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. And that, of course, has been one of the biggest problems with these sort of books, is you go through this long section at the very end, they discuss, oh, well, one way to make this happen is through having the government step in more. Okay. The government can tell you as much as possible, you know, eat more fresh fruits and vegetables. But to do that would require more farmland. The only way to have more farmland to have more fresh fruits and vegetables would be, well, if you were to reduce the amount of grain that you produce that feeds animals, you could use that land to help create more fruits and vegetables. Okay. That of course would make sense, but people aren't going to quit eating meat. I don't picture people, even if you were to read this book, you might kind of go, I guess you decreasing the amount of red meat that I eat. And, you know, I try to do that for the most part. Do I still enjoy steak? Yes. Do I even like veal? Yes. I know how horrible it is to enjoy veal. I also like chicken and fish. For the most part, I try to not consume lots of that. Yeah, I actually definitely do eat a lot less than the national average for the Americans, for an average American. But, you know, somebody telling you that the foods you eat are currently fairly bad for you, yeah, that actually does make sense. However, for how many years we've been discussing how horrible cigarette smoking is, and people ironically still smoke cigarettes. Even if you were to mandate you have to eat more fresh fruits and vegetables, it's still a matter of actual individual personal choice when it comes to what sort of diet you're actually going to consume. So that having been said, I know I kind of got off subject. This book's going to tell you things you probably already know. It might give you some more facts behind them, like the amount of water required to produce a quarter-pound of beef, how much land is used, how much material goes into a hamburger that you eat. And should you actually consume less hamburgers? Yes. Because when you look at when they actually feed an animal, it's not just the animal and the transportation from that. It's everything that goes into the growing of food for said animal, where said animal's at, all of the waste products of said animal. So you have everything that goes into the animal, everything goes out of the animal, and then the food as it comes to you. So it's actually very interesting in that aspect. It gives you lots of really pretty decent insight in a lot of that, as well as a really good background. That's one of the things that actually kind of gone in the way of the larger factory scale farming and factory scale animals. That having been said, it's also kind of like fast food nation, where they do take certain bits and pieces and really kind of over sensationalize them. You know, are there some places where they actually do have people who abuse animals? Yes. Do not all states have laws that actually require animals to be treated humanely? Yes. is normally when a place gets found out for doing abusive things to animals. Are they normally fined? Yes. Do most of them actually end up losing their licensing and shut down? Yes. Are we underfunded when it comes to the people who actually go out and do USDA inspection, FDA inspection? Yes. Will we ever have enough money going into those sorts of things? No. So from that standpoint, yeah, he is discussing things we already kind of know are issues that we know have to be taken care of, but they're actually probably never going to be taken care of probably in my lifetime. We try to deal with much larger things. The idea of if you were to read this book, you would actually sit back and go, yeah, maybe I probably shouldn't eat meat as much as I do. Maybe I probably shouldn't eat dairy as much as I do. Or if I do eat dairy, I should probably eat a lower fat version of dairy. Yeah. Every couple of years, the government comes out with a set of guidelines. Instead of guidelines, almost always push the exact same things. Less red meat, increase the amount of fish that you eat, increase the amount of plant-based food that you have. Have less refined carbs, eat less salt. So a lot of what we hear is already been out there about what this book actually discusses. Like I said, it gives you a little bit more background, some pieces here and there, but beyond that, it's things you already kind of know. So, and if you're going to grab this book and read it, you probably already actually know some of the health aspects. You might not be as well read and well versed on some of the environmental aspects, but I read it and I was like, oh, I'm on a business trip when we decided, you've never been to In-N-Out Burger? No. So I went there and I was like, I have a burger. So I read this, but then the next day I had all vegetarian, which I've done in the past. If it's not going to impact my life, I will still enjoy a lacto-ovo vegan sort of diet where I will occasionally go out to eat someplace and probably partake in meat. So, interesting book. Do I think it's a life-changing book? Not so much. Not so much.